image doesn't look like how we ended up last time because I wanted to add a more painterly effect to all of this, and I'll show you how I did it in this section of the nuke script. Looking at the nuke script, we went over the whole AI part that we got her kind of looking like herself, and then we comped in Leia in the base animation. So we started out with this PNG from Midjourney, and we ended up with this kind of a look so far with just really simple compositing techniques, nothing really advanced. So how do we get it to look more painterly? Well, I pre-comped it out, so let's just run through the nodes right here. Zoom in a little bit, and here is Leia animation, the pre-comp, so I don't have to worry about all those other nodes slowing me down as I add more effects on top of this. And of course I wrote it out to EXRs. So once I did that, I reformatted it to be quite a bit bigger, about 3K, because I know some of this paint effects, I needed a little bit more resolution to work with this. And normally when you up-res stuff, you're going to lose a lot of detail, unless again you're using AI to a little bit smart about it. But when you up-res something, you're going to lose detail. But I knew I was going to add a lot of filters on top of this, so up-resing it is not going to be a big deal because yes, it's going to go soft, but we're going to really kind of twist and mutilate these pixels quite a bit on top of that. So what is this paint effect here that I've kind of invented right here to kind of make it look like a painting? Well, the first thing I do here is I add a bilateral node. And what the bilateral node is it basically does a softening of things. The bilateral node here is computationally expensive. And what I mean by that is it's going to slow you down. Okay, and as you can see, anything right up here that says, hey, I need to use some GPU cards, you know it's probably going to slow you down a little bit, right? But a bilateral node is a filter that is really good at smoothing things, but is particularly good, according to the manual specifically, that it's good at preserving edges, though it can be, again, it says it right there, computationally expensive, right? So it's good at preserving edges, but it's still blurred. It's kind of like a smart blur in Photoshop, right? But just be warned that it can crash your system. I've seen that, or it can slow you down quite a bit. So I not only branched it off to do a bilateral, but I branched it off separately because we're going to add a couple of these branches together. And I created an edge detect on the footage, and the edge detect kicks it out to the alpha channel, which makes it kind of look like this. And this is really where a lot of the painterly effect comes in. And you can play around with the erode size and the blur size, which is basically like the strokes of the painting. As you can see, I'm bringing in and out more detail, and it's really more useful to play around with these settings once you have the final in place, so you can really see the overall effect. It's a little hard right now to see the overall effect when you're just at these intermediate stages. But the blur size is also something you're going to be playing around with to give it a painterly effect as well. So my settings are 0 and 7. You could play around with those a little bit later. Now, if these are going to be the brush strokes, unless we're kind of carving this into charcoal paper, it needs to be inverted. So now I've inverted it. So now it kind of looks more like black paint on top of a white Bristol board or something. I was still in the alpha channel world here, so I shuffled all the alpha channels out to the RGB information right here. So going back out, now our RGB information looks just like what the alpha channel was creating. Okay. And then I brought in the bilateral version of this, and let's zoom in a little bit on all of this, and I merged it with a soft light. And as you can see, especially in the folds of Princess Leia's dress here, this is the before and this is the after, and we're really getting a nice painterly feel. I especially love the texture that's happening right in here, and it just looks like daubs of paint, right? And the lightsaber is wonderful too, because it's giving this dark, almost a pre-malted outline to this, which I really thought was cool. And what you really want to be wary of, though, when you kind of do an effect like this, is that you're really not making the face look funny. There's a high, possibility of putting all these extra lines and funny things in on the face, which starts to make the person look really old or monsterly. So you just want to be wary of that. It didn't really do much to the background because the background was already kind of dark and blurred. But I really like what it was doing with the folds, and I really like what it was doing with these elements down here. So there is our painterly effect. And then I graded it, just a quick white point here, to kind of give it a little bit more darker feel. And then color corrected it to kind of bring out a little bit more of, you know, the mids. Right over here in the master, I just brought the contrast down a little bit and play around with the gamma. So basically just went from here to here. And that's just kind of bringing in some more detail from the shadows, stuff like that. Now, what about all the cracks and all the fun stuff that kind of makes it look really old? Well, I just went to the internet and I just downloaded some cracks from a stock site. And you can just grab this anywhere. I mean, you could just say, you know, cracks, grunge texture, Google, there you go. You got it, right? So I started out with this crack texture. And I transformed it and blurred it a little bit because it was just a little too harsh. So there's a little bit of a blur. And then I graded it a little bit because the darks of it were just a little too dark, and I multiplied it right on top of Leia, right? Just like that, right? But one thing I was sure of right over here, as you can see, I added a roto node to the face because without it, I didn't want the cracks to be all over her face because we're still trying to maintain the beauty of Princess Leia here. Whenever I add grunge to something, I usually roto and separate the face from that. And the roto basically just looks like this. And of course, it's been moved and transformed. But this is basically just inverting the mask so I don't have any of the cracks on top of her face like that. The actors and actresses in the movies that you work on will thank you for it. But that wasn't enough. I also wanted to add a little grunge because it was just still a little too perfect looking. So I went out and found a grunge texture. It was a grayscale texture. So it comes in nuke looking just like this. Okay, which is weird. It's not weird, it's on purpose, but it only has one channel and it assigns it to the red channel. But with a simple shuffle node, you could assign the red channel to all the other channels, and now you have a black and white RGB information of the grunge. Again, we do all this stuff in our digital compositing course. What I did is I kind of mirrored it because I didn't want it to be right on top of the center, transformed it, multiplied that one in as well, and again, still using the roto mask of the face because I didn't want grunge all over her face. Here's before and here's after. So, you know, compositing is like cooking. You add a little spice over here, you add a little ingredient over there, and the end result just keeps adding up. You know, what we call sweetening the comp, so to speak, right? And then, of course, I added some Kodak grain to it as well to give it even a more kind of a feel of age to it, although it's usually reserved for film footage and stuff like that. But I thought it couldn't hurt on this. I clamped it down again, which is, again, something I almost never do. But since the source footage was already 8-bit and when I brought this in, I didn't want to have the lightsaber going into the high dynamic range because it's a painting, and a painting should, you know, paintings aren't in high dynamic range. The painting is limited to the color of white, right? And then reformatted it again to make sure it's 3000 by 3000 square. And then I wrote that out, again, pre-comping it as well. So just looking at her with the cracks and all the wonderful features, we could just zoom up here to see what the pre-comp actually looks like. Here's the pre-comp being brought in and just playing that back. As you can see, I added some glows. So as you can see, as it plays it back, there she is moving her head slightly. And then the glow from the lightsaber is coming in as well. Now, you don't want to sit there and animate glows going up and down and all the way around for, you know, for a million keyframes. So the simplest thing to do with lightsaber glows or flickers of light or anything like that is you can just simply add an expression to this, a noise expression or noise wave to have the flicker happen automatically for you. And that's basically what I did right over here. In both of these glows here, way back here at the very beginning, I added a quick expression to just increase and decrease the brightness randomly. So if we just jump right over here to the lightsaber, start at the beginning, click play, you can see kind of flickers like that. How is that happening? Well, if you'll notice, I'm going to right click on this brightness here, and I'm going to go to edit expression, and it's just this little noise expression that says, hey, take the frame, divide it by 3, randomize it, +1. This little expression will give you the result right over here, and you can find these expressions. Just Google nuke noise expression, and there you go. Or you could just copy this one right here. And if you take a look at what this actually is doing in the curve editor, here's the noise expression of the lightsaber just kind of going up and down randomly. And I kind of wanted to limit it to 1 and to 0 here. So it may basically, the glow can turn completely off, but there's 2 glows on it at the same time, and the mid-range is at 0.5. So that's all that's doing. You don't want to sit there and animate this stuff by hand. So just use simple expressions and that'll do the job for you. So going back to the very last part right over here of Princess Leia, now with the grunge and the funny bits and the age and the grain and the paint and all kinds of fun stuff like that. What did we do to that? The last piece of the puzzle was to put the Princess Leia, or you, so to speak, if you're using yourself, in one of the Hogwarts pictures. And here's the problem with trying to work off of real footage or footage from a movie or something like that, is that the footage that you're going to find online is super compressed, and it's usually low res, and it's terrible quality, and it's really, really hard to work with, right? And obviously you don't want to steal any footage online, but if you're just playing around like we're doing right now, we're not putting anything in our portfolio or something, obviously. As you can see, this footage, the best I could find was 1080, 1920 by 1080 resolution, and super compressed, and it's really soft, and it just didn't look good. And I was probably going to put Princess Leia not in any one of these photos, but this first shot was just going to be like a leading in shot, so to speak, of our Princess Leia. And then I was probably going to put her maybe in this one right here. But as you can see, it's just filled with motion blur, and it's really soft, and it was only there for a couple of seconds. So I was getting kind of frustrated trying to find a really good shot. And what I was looking for was just kind of looking down the wall of Hogwarts, right? And then I thought, well, why use the movie? The Hogwarts video game looks great too, and maybe we can punch it up a little bit. So I threw out the parts from the movie and just kind of ran around the game a little bit with the help of my wife to kind of find some good shots that we could just put in that has the quintessential, lamp and the brick and the color and all that good stuff in there. And, obviously part of the problem is they got all this HUD stuff overlaying it, and you could actually see the character in there as well. That's my wife's character, a little wizard in there. But at least you can control the camera to kind of the angle you were going for. And so she put on an invisibility cloak and kind of crept forward some of these paintings to see if we could put her in there. And it was pretty good. At least it was in 4K, right? So that was a big plus. But I wasn't really happy with this shot here that we were looking at because the camera motion wasn't great. It wasn't very smooth, my fault. And here she is resetting herself. And actually, the screw-up shots, she was doing a great job. But the ones that were screwed up, that was me holding the controller. But it just looked a little bit too on the nose. It just looked like, hey, look at this shot of Princess Leia, who shouldn't be there, instead of just kind of panning across a wall or something randomly. And here we are in, I think, the library of the game. And the game's beautiful. So, why not use some of this stuff? Is it photoreal? No, not yet. But we're just having a little bit fun with some of this stuff. A couple more shots. I thought this would be cool if we can get the drum in front of the picture, sandwiching the shot, so that what we call it, just kind of rotoing out that drum, putting it right in front, which might be kind of cool. But the one we kind of ended up with is this one. We're just kind of close to the wall, and we're just kind of moving around and just kind of panning across, and Princess Leia just happens to be in the painting right there. So this is the one we actually went with. That's the take we used. So what do you do with that footage? Well, you record it on the PS5. You can just put a USB stick right into it, and then you can just download it to the USB drive and just bring it over to the computer. Now here's the problem. It comes in as a WebM file, and WebM files are not universally known, especially in editing programs like After Effects or Premiere or Nuke. You can't load it up, right? Again, these little snags you always run into. Say, how do we convert this? This software package can't do that, can't convert this file, it can't read this file, right? This is Google's proprietary internet movie file format. But if you can get it on your screen, you can find a way to record it. And so all I did is I just played it back through Media Player or VLC and just screen recorded it with a typical screen recording program at the same time. And since it was in 4K, I wasn't too worried about generational loss on that. So here is the actual footage after I screen recorded it, brought it into Nuke, and the first thing I always do in any compositing package or program is as soon as I bring in a movie file, write it out to frames, because these computer software programs, they like working in frames so much more than trying to weed through an interleaved media file. So I brought it in and I wrote it out as an EXR, and then brought in that EXR back in half float, stemmed the damage of all the compression and everything that was going on already, right? So there is our footage now, and it's been retimed to kind of just go from 0 to 240, and we're going to put Princess Leia right there. So here's our Princess Leia right here from our previous steps that we did. And one thing I noticed is that once we put her in there, we're going to have to add a little flicker of the lamp in there later on. So let me just disable that real quick and just show you the steps we had to do to put her inside the shot. So again, here is the Hogwarts PlayStation game. And then I graded it down, which simply just brought the black point up a little bit, which increased saturation. Again, something I liked. It just seemed a little bit too washed out for my taste. So I brought it down a little bit and then took the saturation down, because anytime you play with the gamma, it's going to move the saturation. It's all related. I took Princess Leia, color corrected her as well, so the tonality of it would line up with the shot that we're putting in right up here in the painting, right? So this is her with color correction. This is her without color correction. As you can see, it's just a little too cool, a little too blue. Let's get it more in line with the look of Hogwarts up here, right? As well as putting her up in there, I also defocused her a little bit as well. My defocus is very, very small, defocus pixel of 1, but it's just enough to kind of match the footage as well. Now, of course, simple thing to do with tracking our shot here is a painting is a prime opportunity to do a planar track in Nuke, right? So I just created a planar track node. I told it the area that I want to track, give it a whole lot of air room, the whole painting plus some of the wall. And then I converted that into some corner pinning, which is really done automatically from Nuke. And if you're interested in tracking and all the little cool nitty-gritty stuff that really makes a shot work, tracking is a huge part of a success of a visual effects shot, and we offer that in our tracking and match move course. So here are the corner pin information, so Princess Leia can actually sit right in there and be locked to the footage wherever it moves. Of course, in the corner pin, don't forget, turn on motion blur, right? Now, as far as the flicker of the light, as you can see, it's not a great comp right now, because look, the light right over here is affecting the paintings, but it's not affecting our painting, so we need to add a little bit of light in there, right? And this is the before, and this is the after, right? And so how did I create that along with the same kind of flicker that we used in the lightsaber flicker, right? Well, all I really did is I knew I was going to use a radial shape for the bleed of the light that's happening as it runs across the canvas. So there's where that is. And then I played around a little bit with the grading of it. And I wanted it not just to be a standard boring gradial ramp of a light, which would be just give it away the CG-ness of it, right? So again, I went over to the cracks that I downloaded earlier and all the grunge that I downloaded earlier. I added that into the light that we're going to put in there, so it gives it a little bit more interest, a little bit more feel and texture, right? Now, I used a color dodge putting this together. Why did I use a color dodge instead of just some other typical blending mode? Well, the color dodge gave me a wonderful result of how light actually works. And it's very intense near the source of the light. And then the fall off is not a perfect fall off. A fall off of light is a quadratic fall off. It's due to what we call the inverse square law. Okay, and I'm not going to get into any of that math stuff, but if you're interested in lighting and texturing and rendering, we have a course that talks about the inverse square law, and it's really the secret to make light look like real light instead of just fake CG light. We're not getting into that right now, but that is in our other courses. So then I took that light and I moved it into position, and of course, here is the multiply node that has, guess what, the same expression of the flicker of the lightsaber, right? Why not? Keep reusing it. And so I plussed it in there because you plus lights in, and so there it is, the before and after. Now inside the comp, it would look something like this. Again, sweetening up the comp, right? I wouldn't really call this one sweetening, is more like something you kind of have to do to make it look real. So there it is with the light and the light not there, and it just makes it look a little bit more integrated into the result, right? The last thing I do is I wanted to punch up the PS5 footage a little bit. So I added extra glow in here with a tolerance that only basically highlighted the actual light element right up there. So there's the glow before and after. Simple reformat to 1920 1080. I added a couple of cinematic bars to it And there you have it. Basically a quick little campfire that was started start to finish with the whole process. A little bit of AI thrown in for fun. And now we have Princess Leia as a member of the Hogwarts faculty in her office holding her, I guess, wizard wand lightsaber? Who knows? Again, I'm going to put some of these pieces of footage in the download link of the video file, because if you thought this was interesting, you had a lot of fun, and you want to put yourself or someone else in some of this footage and comp it together, we would love to see it. So please submit it right over to us. Send us a link, send us a download email, and we'd love to see it, and we'll put it in our newsletter as well, and possibly a future campfire to take a look at. Hope you had some fun doing this. I'll see y'all in the next campfire. Ciao.